The shovel blade striking the caliche soil of New Mexico territory made a sound like a dull bell, a lonely punctuation in the vast, hot silence. Elena Rios did not weep. Tears were a luxury, a moisture the land itself had forgotten, and her heart had learned to live without. She was alone, utterly. The crude pine box, hammered together by her own hands, held what was left of Mateo Rios. He had been a man of quiet pride, a man who believed in the inked paper of a deed, who believed that being half Anglo gave him a foothold in a world that only ever looked at his Mexican blood. He had been wrong. Elena finished the mound, tamping the dry, hateful dirt with the back of the shovel. There had been no preacher, no gathering of neighbors. The neighbors were the ones who had watched, or perhaps the ones who had paid. He was gunned down in what the territorial marshal in Santa Fe had called a property dispute. Elena called it murder. She stood, wiping the sweat from her brow with a forearm grimed in dust and her father's grave. She looked at what he had left her. The ranch was 200 acres of dust, sharp rock, and stubborn hope. The small adobe house was half gone, the roof timbers blackened by a fire set 3 weeks ago. A warning she had failed to heed. The fire had taken the main house, but the small barn, the stone-walled spring house, and the meager corral remained. What cattle had not been stolen were scattered, ribs showing, lowing for water that was getting harder to find. She had inherited a ghost, a patch of sun-scorched earth, a mountain of debt at the mercantile, and the cold, watchful eyes of the Calhoun spread, which bordered her land to the north, east, and west, a vulture circling a dying animal. "I will keep it," she whispered to the wind. The wind, her only confidant, whipped the words back, stinging her face with sand. "I will keep it, Papa, I swear on your blood." The vow tasted like ash. That night, she did not sleep in the ruined house. She took a blanket to the barn. The smell of dry hay and old leather a small comfort. She lay listening to the coyotes, their high, thin voices mocking the silence. The land was a prison. The sun rose each morning not as a promise, but as a sentence. It baked the ground into a cracked plate. It bleached the sky to a pale, merciless white. Rattlesnakes, the color of the dirt, coiled in the shade of the sparse mesquite. She learned to walk with her eyes on the ground, to read the language of the dust. A scuffed print meant a coyote, a drag mark, a snake, a fresh hoof print. Trouble. She was mending a break in the corral fence, the rough wood splintering her palms. When she saw the hoof print, it was fresh, a shod horse, not her own. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a dry, fast beat. She dropped the hammer and moved, low and swift, to the barn. Her father's rifle, a heavy Winchester, was propped against the wall. She checked the load, her hands steady, betraying the fear that tightened her throat. She stepped out of the barn and into the blinding light. A man was at the trough, letting his horse drink, as casual as if he owned the place. He was young, with a careless slouch and a pistol belted low. A Calhoun man. She recognized the brand on his horse. "You are trespassing," Elena said. Her voice was flat, colder than she felt. The cowhand turned, slow. A lazy smile spread across his face when he saw her. He took in her frayed trousers, the smudge of dirt on her cheek, the way her father's shirt hung loose on her frame. "Well now," he drawled, pushing his hat back. "Just watering my horse, ma'am, Mr. Calhoun. He don't mind us using what's his." "This is not his," Elena said. "This is Rios' land. Get your horse away from my water." The man's smile widened, turning ugly. He hitched his gun belt. "Mr. Calhoun figures that's just a matter of time. Figures it's all his, and what he figures, he usually gets. Maybe he'll get you too. A feisty half-breed like you might fetch a high price, if you're broke in right." Elena raised the rifle. The heavy barrel did not waver. She centered the sight on the tarnished silver concho of his belt. "I am not easily scared," she said. her voice dropping to a whisper. "And I am not broke in by anyone. You have 3 seconds to get on that horse and ride back to the man who sent you. 1. The man's eyes flicked from her face to the muzzle of the rifle. The smile vanished. He had seen trespassers before, but he had not seen this. He had not seen the absolute stillness in her eyes, the utter lack of bluff. 2. She cocked the hammer. The click was the loudest sound in the territory. He raised his hands, palms out. "Easy, girl, easy, just leavin'." He backed up, grabbed his reins, and swung into the saddle, never once taking his eyes off her. He kicked the horse into a gallop, sending a spray of gravel back at her. Elena stood there, the rifle heavy in her arms, until he was nothing but a smudge of dust against the horizon. Only then did she allow herself to tremble. The fear came, cold and sharp, but the pride that followed was hot, burning it away. She had proven she was not easily scared, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that this was only the beginning. He would send another man, or he would come himself. He came 2 days later. She was trying to re-shoe her mare, a frustrating, clumsy business, when a shadow fell over her. It was a long shadow, stretching dark across the bright dust of the corral. She froze, her hand still on the mare's hoof. She looked up, slowly. He was not like the cowhand. He was not young, and he was not careless. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and sat his horse as if he had been born on it. He wore a dark coat, stained with sweat and alkali. A scar, white and puckered, ran from the corner of his left eye down to a jaw hidden by a rough, dark beard. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, and they missed nothing. This was Thorne Calhoun. He did not speak. He just looked. He looked at the burned house, the broken corral, the patched-up barn. He looked at her, and his gaze was like a weight, pressing her into the dirt. "You are trespassing, Mr. Calhoun," she said, letting the mare's hoof drop. She stood straight, forcing herself to meet that gaze. "Am I?" His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. He swung down from the horse. He was even taller on the ground. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his right leg. He moved to the trough and ran a hand along the waterline, testing its depth. "You sent your man to test me," she said. "I sent him back." "I saw." He turned. "He was a fool. I do not abide fools." He reached into his coat pocket, not for a gun, but for a folded stack of papers. He tossed them at her feet. They landed in the dust. "The law, however, I do abide." Elena stared at the papers, then back at him. "I do not know what this is." "It is a court order, signed by Judge Hemlock in Santa Fe. Your father's title was leveraged against a bank note he failed to pay. I bought the note. This land, this water, that broken-down horse, and that rifle you've got hidden in the barn, they are all mine." The words hit her, knocking the air from her lungs. A lie. It had to be a lie. Her father had been careful. He owed no one. You forged this. The judge disagreed. Calhoun said, his face impassive. "The land is mine. The law says so. You have until sundown tomorrow to be gone." Rage, pure and blinding, surged through her. This was how they did it, not with a bullet in the light, but with a pen in the dark. They murdered her father, then stole his land with a piece of paper. "No," she said, the word ripped from her throat. He looked at her, a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, in those cold eyes. "No." "This is my father's land. He is buried on it. I will not leave." Calhoun was silent for a long moment. He studied her, as if she were a new breed of animal he had not yet learned to break. "You are half Rios, half Price. Your mother was a Mexican line worker. Your father was a white man's son who got himself disowned. You do not belong to them, and you do not belong to us. You have nothing, no one." "I have this," she spat, kicking the dirt. He almost smiled. It was a terrible sight, a stretching of the scar that held no warmth. You have spirit, I will give you that, but spirit does not stop a bullet, and it does not win back a legal claim. He stepped closer. She held her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to run. He smelled of horse, leather, and something metallic, like old blood. I will make you an offer, he said, his voice low. You are a hard worker. I can see it in your hands. You stay. You work the ranch. It is my ranch now, so you work for me. You will have a roof in the barn and food from my table. You will work off the debt I paid. You mean be your slave? I mean work, he corrected, his voice sharp. You will follow my rules. You will answer to my foreman. You will do as you are told. Those are my conditions. You stay under my rule, or you leave, with nothing but the clothes on your back. It was not an offer. It was a branding. He was giving her a choice between death by starvation in the wilderness or a slow death of her pride on her own land. Elena looked at the dust between his boots. She looked at the legal papers he had thrown down. She gathered all the grief, all the rage, all the burning injustice in her chest, and she spat. The glob of saliva landed squarely in the dust, inches from his boot. She lifted her chin. Get off my land. Thorne Calhoun looked at the spot where she had spit. He looked at her, his eyes unreadable. He did not move, did not wipe the implied insult away. He simply absorbed it. He had seen defiance before. He had seen it in the faces of men charging his line, their sabers raised just before he cut them down. He had been a major in the Union cavalry. He had learned that all things could be broken. Men, horses, land. He had seen the fields of Virginia turn to mud and blood. He had learned to hate. Hate was a clean fuel. It burned hot and left nothing behind. He remembered the ride back east after the surrender. He had a wife then, Sarah, a pale, gentle woman who smelled of lavender and soap. He had come home to find her a skeleton, her skin a waxy yellow, the smell in the room not of lavender, but of typhoid. The fever had burned away the woman he knew, leaving a terrified stranger who did not recognize the scarred man at her bedside. He had sat there for a week, holding a hand that was already cold, watching the life drain out of her. He had lost. He could not fight the fever. He could not give an order to a disease. It got colder. The first snows came. Their daughter, little Rose, had been born weak. The cold took her in the night, a silent, cruel theft. He had buried her in a blizzard. The ground so frozen his pickaxe had sparked against the earth. He had dug the grave with his own hands, the wind screaming, his tears freezing to his beard. He had buried his wife 2 days later. He sold the farm in Virginia, took his blood money, and rode west, to a place as hard and empty as he was. He came to New Mexico territory and carved out the Calhoun spread with blood, barter, and brutality. He had not let anyone close since. He had not allowed himself to feel anything but the cold satisfaction of ownership. This land was his. He had paid for it, one way or another. And now this girl, this half-breed girl with nothing but a ruined name and a spine of steel, was spitting at his feet. She was defying the one thing he had left, his rule. He turned without a word. He swung onto his horse, the leather groaning under his weight. He looked down at her one last time. Tomorrow, he said, sundown. He rode away, leaving her alone in the crushing silence. The legal papers a white scar on the dark earth. Elena stood there until the sun began to bleed into the mountains. Sundown tomorrow. He would be back, and he would bring his men. He would drag her off. He would put his brand on her cattle, his lock on her barn. Pride. It was all her father had left her. It was all she had. She walked not to the barn, but to the scorched ruins of the house. In the kitchen, a small box of tinder and matches had survived, tucked into a stone niche. She picked it up. She walked past the barn, past the corral, to the small, fallow field near the spring. It was the only part of the land that held promise, The corn was withered on the stalk. The beans dried in their pods. It was her seed for next year. It was the food for the winter. It was the only thing of value he had truly stolen. If he wanted the land, he would get the land, but he would get it as she had, burned. She struck a match. The sulfur flared. A tiny blue star in the dusk. She touched it to a dry cornstalk. The fire caught instantly. A hungry, orange tongue licked up the stalk, jumping to the next and the next. The dry husks crackled, a sound like mocking laughter. In moments, the entire field was a sheet of flame, smoke billowing black against the purple sky. She stood and watched it burn. She felt a fierce, terrible joy. It was her. She was destroying her own future, her own food, her own hope, just to deny him. A shout cut through the roar of the flames. "You little fool!" He was back. He must have seen the smoke from his own property. He was riding hard, his face a mask of black rage. He did not ride to the fire. He rode straight at her. He vaulted from the saddle before the horse even stopped, charging her like he was charging a line of infantry. "What have you done?" he roared. "It is mine to burn," she screamed back at him, her face illuminated by the fire she had set. He grabbed for the tinderbox in her hand. She fought him, striking at his chest with her free hand. She was a wildcat, all claws and teeth, fueled by a grief so deep it had turned to madness. "It's mine!" she shrieked, striking him across the scar. His control snapped. The hate he had nurtured for years, the rage he kept banked like coals, flared. He was not a rancher anymore. He was a cavalry officer breaking an enemy. He grabbed her by the front of her shirt, his fist twisting in the fabric. He lifted her off her feet, his face inches from hers. "You have nothing!" He threw her. It was not a push, it was a throw. He used all his strength, all his rage, and hurled her away from the fire, away from him. She flew backward, landing hard in the unforgiving dirt. Her head struck a stone hidden in the dust. The world exploded in a flash of white, then red. She tasted blood and grit. The air was knocked from her lungs in a painful gasp. She lay there, stunned, the smoke burning her eyes, the fire roaring in her ears. She heard his heavy boots approach. He stood over her, a dark silhouette against the inferno she had created. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He had done it. He had used his brutal force. He had broken her, slowly, painfully. She pushed herself up on one elbow. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, smearing the blood and dirt across her cheek. She looked up at him, this giant of a man, this thief, this killer, and she smirked. The grin was a bloody, defiant slash in the firelight. "Is that all you've got?" she rasped. Thorne Calhoun froze. He stared down at her. He had seen men beg. He had seen them cry. He had never seen this. He had thrown her with enough force to shatter bone. And she was grinning at him. He had used his power, and it had glanced off her as if it were nothing. He had no answer. There was nothing left to do. He could not hit her again. He could not drag her. He had won the land, but he had lost this. He had lost the victory. He turned, his limp more pronounced, and walked back to his horse. He swung into the saddle and, without looking back, rode into the darkness, leaving her in the light of her burning field. Elena watched him go. The smirk faded. The pain came rushing in, a tidal wave of it. Her head throbbed. Her ribs ached. Every part of her hurt. But she was not broken. She crawled, pulling herself through the dirt, until she reached the relative safety of the barn. She collapsed onto the hay, the smell of smoke clinging to her clothes. The fire burned itself out, leaving the field a patch of black, smoking ruin. She lay there in the dark, cradling the rusted pistol she had hidden under the hay. She was bruised. She was bleeding. She was homeless on her own land, but she was alive, and she was still here. She closed her eyes. The cold of the desert night Savidio and in. "Matteo," she whispered. her father's name a prayer and a curse. "Papa, I am still here." The sun rose on a world of ash and bruises. Elena had not moved from the barn. She woke to the sharp, agonizing protest of muscles and bone. Her head throbbed, a dull hammer behind her eyes. Her lip was split, swollen and tender. When she sat up, the world swam in a gray, painful haze, but she was alive. She heard the horse before she saw it. This time, he was not alone. 2 riders sat their mounts a respectful distance behind him. Thorne Calhoun dismounted, his limp seeming more pronounced in the morning light. He walked not to the burned house, but directly to the barn. He found her in the shadows, sitting on a pile of hay, the rusted pistol in her lap. She looked like a cornered animal, filthy, bruised, and dangerous. He stopped 10 feet from her. He did not look at her injuries. He looked at the smoking black rectangle that had been her cornfield. "That was foolish," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of the rage from the night before. It was worse. It was the voice of a man tallying a ledger. "You destroyed a winter's worth of feed and seed. My feed, my seed." "It was mine to burn," she whispered, her throat raw. "It was mine to harvest," he corrected. "You have added to the debt. You cannot pay with crops. You cannot pay with money. You have nothing." He waited. She said nothing, just stared at the dirt floor, her knuckles white on the grip of the pistol. "I gave you a choice," he said. "You chose poorly. Now, you have a different one, a final one." He gestured to the open barn door, to the sun-bleached plains beyond. "You can walk. You can take that pistol, what is left of your pride, and see how far you get before the coyotes or the cold find you. You will be dead in 3 days. Or you can work." She looked up, her eyes narrowed. "I am not your slave." "You are my debtor," he said, the words sharp as chips of ice. "You will work off what your father owed, and what you cost me last night. You will live in this barn. You will eat what I provide. After my men are fed, you will report to my foreman, Jedediah Stone. You will do every job he gives you, from sunup to sundown. You will not complain. You will not shirk. You will not spit at me again. You will work until I say the debt is paid, or you will walk." He had taken her land. He had taken her home. Now he was taking her name, her will, her very life, and turning it into a debt to be paid. It was a brutality far colder than his fists. She looked past him, at the endless, empty land. He was right. It was a death sentence. She had nowhere to go, no one. She was an outsider to the Mexicans in the valley, who saw her Anglo blood as a betrayal. She was an outcast to the whites, who saw only the Mexican. Survival. It was a bitter, ugly thing, stripped of all dignity. She hated him. She hated him with a force that was purer and hotter than the fire she had set. That hate was what she would live on. "I will work," she said. The words tasted like poison. "I thought you might," Calhoun said. He turned, his face unreadable. "Be at the main ranch house in 1 hour. Mr. Stone will be waiting." He walked away, his shadow retreating from the barn, leaving her in the cold and the dark. The work was not just hard. It was meant to break her. Jedediah Stone, the foreman, was a thin, leathery man with eyes that held a casual cruelty. He seemed to take a quiet pleasure in assigning her the worst, most back-breaking labor on the Calhoun spread. She mucked out stalls until her back felt it would snap in 2. She hauled 60-pound sacks of feed, her arms trembling with the strain. She dug post holes in the baked, rocky soil until her hands, soft from a life of running her own small place, were raw. Within 2 days, they were a mess of blisters, cracked open and bleeding, stinging with sweat and dirt. The cowhands, a rough collection of drifters, veterans, and hard cases, watched her with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. They did not speak to her, but they spoke at her. "Look at Calhoun's little savage," One of them, a loud-mouthed man named Pike, would say just loud enough for her to hear. "Thinks she's too good to talk, but not too good to shovel manure." "Heard he found her in the dirt." Another laughed. "Likes 'em filthy, I reckon." They called her the half-breed, the savage, Calhoun's pet. Elena built a wall inside herself. She did not look at them. She did not speak. She refused to cry, refused to show pain, though every muscle in her body screamed. She focused on the task. Swing the pick, shovel the dirt, lift the sack. The only time she felt a flicker of her old self was with the horses. Stone, seeing her work, had sneeringly assigned her to groom the mounts. It was meant as another humiliation. Instead, it was a reprieve. The animals did not judge her blood. They responded to her steady hands, her quiet voice. She had a way with them. One afternoon, a high-strung bay stallion, a new horse Calhoun had bought, was fighting Stone, rearing and striking, its eyes white with fear. "Damn you!" Stone cursed, yanking on the lead. "You are choking him," Elena said, her first words to him in a week. Stone rounded on her. "You think you can do better, savage?" She ignored the name. She walked slowly toward the horse, her hands open, her voice a low murmur. "Easy, boy, easy. Now, no one is hurting you." The horse quieted, its ears flickering. It watched her, snorting, but it held still. She ran a hand, gentle despite the raw skin, down its neck, then took the lead from a stunned and furious Stone. The stallion followed her into the barn without a single pull. She did not see Thorne Calhoun watching from the porch of the main house. He saw her skill. He saw the way she moved, the defiance in her posture. Even when she was covered in grime, it did not soften him. It only made the lines around his mouth tighten. She had proven she could ride. She had proven she could work. She had proven she was not broken. It did not earn her respect from the men. It earned her resentment. The incident came a few nights later. She had finished her work, eaten her cold scraps of beans and bread alone on a hay bale, and was heading back to her corner of the barn. Stone had sent her to the bunkhouse to retrieve a new coil of rope. She hated the bunkhouse. It smelled of unwashed men, cheap whiskey, and stale smoke. Most of the hands were out, but she knew some stayed in. She slipped inside. The air was thick. Pike was there, sitting at a table with two other men, a bottle between them. He saw her, and a slow, ugly grin spread across his face. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he drawled, pushing his chair back. He stood up, blocking her path to the ropes. "Come for a visit, little savage? Tired of sleeping with the horses?" "Mr. Stone sent me for rope," she said, her voice flat, her eyes on the coil hanging from a wall peg. "Mr. Stone, is it?" Pike laughed. He stepped closer. He smelled sour, like the whiskey on his breath. "You are awful polite. You polite to Calhoun, too. Is that how you keep your place in the barn? Or does he make you beg?" "Let me pass," she said, trying to step around him. He grabbed her arm. His grip was like a steel trap. "Not so fast. We ain't properly introduced. I think you need to be taught some manners. Maybe you need a real man to show you what you are good for." His other hand snaked out, grabbing a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. She cried out, a sharp gasp of pain and rage. She slammed her boot heel down on his instep, hard. He roared, his grip tightening, and backhanded her across the face. The blow sent her reeling against the wall, her split lip reopening, the taste of blood flooding her mouth. "You little," he began, lunging for her. He never finished the sentence. The bunkhouse door slammed open. Thorne Calhoun stood framed in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the night. The room went dead silent. Thorne did not speak. He moved with a speed that was terrifying. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed Pike by the shoulder, and spun him around. His first punch was not a punch. It was a blow, a solid, brutal impact of bone against bone. It struck Pike in the jaw with a sickening crack. Pike crumpled. Thorne did not stop. He was not protecting Elena. This was not a rescue. This was something else. This was a cold, possessive fury. He hauled Pike to his feet and hit him again, this time in the gut. Pike folded, gasping, spitting blood. Elena watched, frozen against the wall, her heart hammering. The rage coming off Thorne was a physical force, a cold darkness that filled the room. This was not the hot anger from the field. This was the methodical, soulless violence of a man who knew how to kill. He is done, one of the other hands stammered. Thorne ignored him. He kicked Pike in the ribs as he lay on the floor. A sharp snap echoed in the room. He reached down, grabbed Pike by the collar, and began to beat him. A steady, rhythmic, terrible barrage of punches, until the man's face was an unrecognizable pulp. Elena had never seen such rage. It was not about her. It was not about justice. It was about his authority, about someone touching what he considered his... She was his debtor, his worker, his thing. The realization chilled her to the bone. Finally, he stopped. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. Pike was unconscious, or perhaps dead. It was impossible to tell. Thorne looked at the other two men, who were pressed against the far wall, their faces pale. "Get out!" They scrambled past him and vanished into the night. He stood there for a moment, his fists bloody. Then, he bent down, grabbed Pike's boot, and began to drag him. He dragged the limp, broken body out the door, across the yard, and into the dark brush at the edge of the arroyo. Elena heard the heavy, sliding sound, and then a final, dull thud. He walked back, wiping his bloody hands on his trousers. He stopped in the doorway, looked at her. His face was a mask of shadows, his eyes black pits. "Get back to the barn," he ordered, his voice a low growl. She fled, stumbling, her breath catching in sobs she refused to let loose. She did not sleep. She sat in the hay, shaking. The image of his cold, methodical rage burned into her mind. A few nights later, the silence on the ranch was heavy, suffocating. The other hands avoided her, their eyes skittering away. Pike was gone. No one asked where. Elena could not sleep. The air in the barn was too close. She slipped out, keeping to the shadows, needing the vast, open sky to breathe. The main house was dark, except for a single low-burning lamp on the porch. He was there. Thorne sat in a chair, tilted back against the adobe wall. He had a knife in his hand and a small block of pine. He was carving. She froze, melting back into the shadow of the spring house. She watched him, his large, scarred hands, the same hands that had beaten a man half to death, moved with a surprising delicacy. The knife blade flashed, peeling away thin curls of wood. He was focused. The harsh lines of his face softened in the yellow lamplight. He seemed calm, at peace. She could not reconcile this man with the brute from the bunkhouse. He was carving a figure, a small bird, its wings half spread. He stopped, his hands going still. He did not look up. He did not turn his head. "You should be sleeping," he said, his voice quiet, carrying easily in the still night air. He had known she was there. He must have heard her, or sensed her. Her heart leaped into her throat. She said nothing. She simply turned and slipped away, a ghost retreating to the shadows. The weather turned a week later. The sky, which had been a clear, merciless blue for months, turned a bruised, greenish gray. The air grew heavy, still, and electric. A prairie storm was coming. It hit just after dusk, a wall of wind and water that seemed intent on tearing the world apart. Lightning cracked, illuminating the ranch in stark, terrifying flashes. The wind howled like a mourner. Rain came down in solid, horizontal sheets. Elena huddled in the barn, the wind screaming through the slats, the entire structure groaning around her. It was a night of pure, elemental fury. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a scoured, muddy world in its wake. The arroyo, usually a dry ribbon of sand, was a raging, muddy torrent, and 100-yard stretch of the north fence, the one that kept the herd from the steep banks, was gone, washed away. Thorne stood at the edge of the damaged fence line, his face grim. Jed Stone spat a stream of tobacco. "That's 3 days' work. Mr. Calhoun, need 4, maybe 5 men to reset those posts in this mud." Thorne looked at the spooked herd, huddled on the high ground. "I do not have 3 days. The herd scattered as it is." He turned, his eyes finding Elena, who was reinforcing the corral gate. "She'll come with me." Stone looked surprised. "Her? Sir, that's man's work, hard. She can ride, and she can work." Thorne cut him off. He strode to the barn and emerged with a heavy oilskin slicker, which he threw at her. It hit her in the chest. "Get your horse. We leave in 5 minutes." The world was a sea of mud. The rain had softened to a cold, persistent drizzle that soaked through everything. They rode in silence, the only sound the sucking plop of their horses' hooves in the muck. The work was brutal. The ground was saturated, refusing to hold the new posts. They had to dig twice as deep, bracing the posts with rocks they hauled from the arroyo bank. They stretched the ice-cold wire, their hands numb, the barbs tearing at their skin. They worked for hours, mud caked to their knees, rain dripping from their hat brims. The tension between them was a tangible thing, a third presence on the fence line, vibrating with unspoken rage. Elena, her hands raw and bleeding again, fumbled with the wire stretcher. Her numb fingers slipped, and the wire sprang loose, recoiling with a vicious snap. Thorne, who was tamping a post, looked up. "You are useless," he snarled, ripping the tool from her grasp. "Give it here. I will do it." Something inside her, worn thin by the work, the humiliation, and the cold, finally snapped. "I am not useless," she shouted, her voice raw. "I am doing the work you are too cheap to pay other men for. You hide behind your legal papers and your foreman, but you are nothing but a bully." He rounded on her, his face dark as the storm clouds. "I am the man who owns you. Girl, you are here because I allow it. You eat my food, you live on my land. You seem to forget the terms." "Your terms!" she screamed, jabbing a muddy finger at his chest. "You stole this! You waited until my father was dead, and you stole it from me! You are a thief and a coward!" "I am the man who did not leave you to die in the dirt," he roared, stepping so close she was forced to crane her neck to look up at him. "I gave you a choice. You are the one who burns her own fields. You threw me in that dirt. You attacked me. I stopped you from being a fool." "You are a brute," she shrieked, her control gone. "My father was twice the man you will ever be." The word struck him. She saw the flash, the flicker of something deep and wounded in his eyes. Without thinking, fueled by a year of grief and rage, she slapped him. The sound was sharp, a crack that echoed in the damp, heavy air. His head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. A terrible, cold silence fell. He turned his head back, slowly. His eyes were no longer the color of a winter sky. They were black. He moved faster than she could blink. He grabbed her, not by the arm, not by the shirt, but by the waist, his hands like steel bands. He lifted her off her feet and slammed her back against the fence post they had just set. The wood dug into her spine, knocking the air from her lungs. He pinned her there, his body a solid, unyielding wall against hers. The rain plastered his wet shirt to his chest, and she could feel the heat of him, the hard muscles, the thundering of his heart, or perhaps it was her own. His slicker was open, so was hers. They were chest to chest, mud and sweat and rain between them. His face was inches from hers. His beard, wet and rough, scratched her cheek. She could see the white line of his scar. the fury in his flared nostrils. His eyes burned into hers. She was trapped, utterly. He was stronger, larger, and consumed by a rage that was different from the coldness in the bunkhouse. This was hot, personal, and aimed entirely at her. She was terrified. And somewhere, deep beneath the terror, a strange, dark pulse beat. She lifted her chin, her lip curling in the last, desperate act of defiance she had. Her voice was a low, trembling rasp. "Do it," she whispered. "Hurt me. Show me what kind of man you are. Is that all you've got?" He stared at her, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle jumped. His grip on her waist was bruising. Lifting her half off the ground, she felt the tremor that ran through his arms, the war that was raging behind his eyes. For one agonizing heartbeat, the world stopped. She thought he would hit her. She thought he would kiss her. Both seemed equally violent, equally possible. Then, with a sound that was half groan, half curse, he shoved himself away from her. He stumbled back, as if she were the one who had struck him. He stood there, his back to her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was breathing in great, ragged gasps. "Get the hammer!" he growled, his voice thick and strained. He did not look at her. He just walked away, down the fence line, to the next broken post. Elena sagged against the wood, her knees too weak to hold her. She was shaking, a violent, bone-deep tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. She hated him. She hated his strength. And she hated, with a burning, acrid shame, the part of her that had not wanted him to let go. They finished the fence in a heavy, brutal silence. They rode back in the dark, soaked to the skin, caked in mud. Elena slid from her horse, every muscle aching. She did not bother with food. She stumbled into the barn and collapsed onto her pile of hay, too exhausted to even wipe the grime from her face. She fell into a sleep so deep it was like a drowning. And she dreamed. She was in the field. The corn was burning, the flames roaring, the smoke thick and acrid. Her father was lying in the dirt, just as she had been. He was reaching for her, his face contorted in pain. She tried to run to him, but her boots were lead, stuck fast in thick, wet mud. The fire surged, licking at her back, and she cried out, a sound of pure terror. Then he was there, Thorne Calhoun. He stood behind her, a tall, dark shape against the wall of fire. She could not see his face, only his silhouette. He was just there. She felt his hand, large and heavy, settle on her shoulder. It did not push, it did not grip, it just rested there. A solid, warm weight. He was steadying her. He was holding her, as her world burned down. Elena woke with a gasp, her heart pounding in the pitch-black barn. She was alone. The only sound was the drip of water from the eaves. She wrapped her arms around herself, but she could not stop shivering. She had never felt so cold. The rhythm of the ranch was a brutal, mindless pounding. Muck the stall, haul the feed, mend the tack. The day after the storm, Elena was back at it, her body a single, unified ache, her mind a numb fog. The dream of Thorne's hand on her shoulder haunted her, a phantom touch she could still feel, warm and heavy. She scrubbed at a horse's hoof with a pick, her knuckles raw, trying to scrape the image from her mind. A lone rider approached the ranch, not from the direction of the Calhoun fields, but from the east, the trail that led to Santa Fe. He was not a cowhand. He wore a dusty suit and carried a leather satchel. He dismounted, looking around at the hard-scrabble ranch with a politician's practiced neutrality. Thorne emerged from the main house, wiping his hands on a rag. Jedediah Stone, the foreman, angled in from the corral. "Mr. Thorne Calhoun?" the man asked. "I am," Thorne said. "Thomas Riker. Sir, I am a clerk with the Territorial Land Commission." He pulled a sheaf of papers from his satchel. A formal complaint has been filed regarding the title of the neighboring property, formerly belonging to Mateo Rios. Elena froze, the hoof pick still in her hand. The claim is legal, Thorne said, his voice flat. The banknote was purchased in good faith. That is what the hearing will determine. Sir, Riker said, unperturbed. The commission has reviewed the initial complaint, filed some weeks ago by a Mr. Silas Croft on behalf of the Rios estate. Silas Croft. The name hit Elena like a drink of cold water. Her father's lawyer, an old, kind man her father had trusted. He had not abandoned her. A formal hearing, Riker continued, is set for 1 week from today, 10 o'clock, at the Commission Chambers in Santa Fe. As the current holder of the deed, your presence is required. As the complainant, he turned, seeing Elena for the first time. Miss Elena Rios, your testimony will be heard. He handed a paper to Thorne and walked over to hand one to Elena. She wiped her muddy hand on her trousers before taking it. It felt impossibly clean, impossibly official. Hope. It was a terrible, dangerous thing. A seed she thought had been burned black. It cracked open in her chest, a painful, fragile sprout. Riker mounted his horse. Good day, Mr. Calhoun, ma'am. He tipped his hat and rode away, leaving a thick, vibrating silence in his wake. Elena turned to Thorne. He was staring at the paper, his face a mask of cold fury. He crushed the document in his fist. It is a legal claim, he bit out. He is wasting our time. He is giving me a chance, Elena said, her voice shaking, not with fear, but with this new, terrifying hope. Mr. Croft is my witness. He knows my father had no debt. A drunk old fool against a stack of legal paper? The hearing will last 5 minutes. I am going, she said. You are my debtor. You will stay here and work. You cannot stop me from attending a legal hearing about my own land, she shot back, her newfound courage making her bold. Or are you afraid, Mr. Calhoun, afraid the truth will come out? His eyes narrowed. He looked at her, at the crumpled paper in his hand, and then at the horizon, toward the north, where the Jameson Ranch lay. You are a fool if you think this is about truth, he said. It is a trap. It is my only chance, she said. I am going. He was right. He could not legally stop her. You set foot off this land. You are no longer under my protection, he growled. I was never under your protection, she said, turning her back on him. I was under your rule. She left the next morning before dawn. She took her mare, a canteen, a handful of dried beef, and the rusted pistol. She did not know if it would even fire. But it was a comfort, a cold piece of her father's will in her hand. The ride to Santa Fe was over 50 miles, 2 days of hard travel through high, empty country. The land was beautiful and merciless. She rode hard, pushing the mare, terrified of being too late. She camped the first night in a small box canyon, building a tiny, smokeless fire of dry mesquite. She was exhausted, but the hope kept her awake. She stared into the small flames, her father's face in her mind. As she scanned the dark ridge above her, she saw it, a pinprick of light. Another fire, miles back, but on her trail. Her heart hammered. A bandit? A drifter? Or him? She knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and infuriating, that it was Calhoun. He was following her, not protecting her, watching her, making sure his debtor did not flee. The thought filled her with a cold rage. She doused her fire and sat in the dark, the pistol in her lap. The next day, she saw them. They were not trying to hide. 3 riders, fanned out, keeping a steady half-mile pace behind her. They were not Calhoun's men. She recognized the lazy, slouching way they sat their saddles. She had seen men like them in town, heard their loud boasts. Jameson's men. Thorne's words came back to her. It is a trap. They were not after her. They were after him. They were using her as bait, drawing him out, away from his ranch, away from his men. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She kicked her mare into a faster trot. The riders behind her did the same. This was not a pursuit. It was a herding. They were pushing her. She rounded a bend, the trail dipping into a wide, dry arroyo, and she saw him. Thorn was waiting. He sat his horse in the middle of the dry riverbed, a solitary, dark figure. He had seen the Jameson men, and instead of hiding, instead of flanking them, he had ridden ahead to intercept. It was the boldest, most arrogant, most dangerous thing she had ever seen. The three riders fanned out, pulling their rifles. "Calhoun!" one of them shouted, a man with a heavy beard and a dirt-stained duster. "You are a long way from home. Lost your pet." "She is not your concern." "Amos," Thorn called back, his voice calm, echoing in the arroyo. "You and your boys turn around. This does not have to be ugly." "I reckon it does." Amos laughed, raising his rifle. "Mr. Jameson is real tired of you blocking the view." Elena screamed, "It is a trap!" Amos fired. The shot went wide, kicking up dust near Thorn's horse. And then the world exploded. A shot cracked from the ridge above the Jameson men. One of them grunted, grabbing his shoulder, and fell from his horse. Thorn had not come alone. He had brought Jedediah Stone. Thorn did not wait. He spurred his horse forward, not away, but directly at the other two riders, his pistol in his hand. He was not a rancher anymore. He was a cavalry major, charging the line. He fired twice. The man in the duster, Amos, jerked, his rifle discharging into the sky as he toppled. The third man, panicked, turned to flee, firing wildly over his shoulder. Elena scrambled from her mare, hiding behind the horse as a bullet whined past her ear. The third rider spurred his horse up the Arab Clio bank. Thorn was on him, his face a mask of cold, efficient fury. The rider turned, leveling his pistol. "Thorn!" Elena screamed. Thorn fired, but the man fired a fraction of a second sooner. Thorn's shot hit the man square in the chest, but the man's bullet struck Thorn, high on his left side, spinning him half out of the saddle. He grunted, a sharp exhalation of pain, but he held on. He watched the man fall, his pistol dropping from a dead hand. Jedediah Stone rode down from the ridge, his rifle smoking. Silence. The air was thick with sulfur and the coppery smell of blood. Thorn swayed, his face pale, a gray-white tint under his tan. He looked down at his side. A dark, wet stain was spreading rapidly across his shirt. "Sir," Jedediah said, his voice tight with alarm. "You are hit." "It's a scratch," Thorn grunted, but his voice was thin. He tried to dismount, but his leg buckled. He fell, catching himself on his hands and knees before slumping into the dust. "Elena, get him! I will handle this mess," Jedediah ordered, his eyes already on the dead men. Elena ran to Thorn. He was trying to push himself up, his face slick with sweat. "Get up, Calhoun!" she yelled, her panic making her rough. She grabbed his arm, pulling. He was a dead weight. "Get on your horse!" He gasped, his eyes clenched shut in pain. "Now!" Somehow, between her pulling and his own monstrous grit, he got his good foot in the stirrup and hauled himself onto his horse. He slumped over the saddle horn, breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. "There is a line shack," Elena said, her mind racing. "An old shepherd's cabin, north of here, maybe 2 miles. "Go," Jedediah said, already checking the bodies. "Get him there. I will be along." She grabbed the reins of Thorn's horse and kicked her own, pulling him along. He was fading, swaying dangerously. She rode beside him, her shoulder pressed to his, her hand on his back, physically holding him in the saddle. The cabin was a ruin, 4 low adobe walls, a section of collapsed roof, and a single, rotting cot, but it was cover. She half dragged, half lowered him onto the cot. He was shivering, his skin clammy. "My saddlebag," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Flask." She ran out, her hands shaking, and retrieved his bag. She found the flask of whiskey, a soldier's sewing kit, and a few clean rags. She ran back in. I have to see the wound." He just nodded, his eyes closed. She took her knife and cut his shirt away. The wound was ugly. It was high, missing his gut, but it had torn through the muscle of his side, a ragged, bloody gash that was oozing dark blood. It is bad," she whispered. "Whiskey," he ordered, his teeth chattering. "On it." She poured a stream of whiskey onto the wound. He roared, a strangled, inhuman sound, his back arching off the cot. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist, his fingers clamping down like a steel trap. She cried out, her own pain a mirror of his. "Hold still," he ground out, his eyes screwed shut. She steadied herself, forcing her breath to slow. "I have to stitch it. Thorn." It was the first time she had used his name. She tried to pull her wrist free. His grip only tightened. "I need my hand," she said, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. He opened his eyes. They were burning with fever, pain, and something else, that same terrifying intensity from the fence post. "You are shaking," he rasped. "You are crushing my wrist. Let me go." "Do not lie to me," he breathed, his voice a low, rough growl. His eyes bored into hers. "You are not shaking from the blood. You want this too." He was not talking about the wound. He was talking about the storm, the tension, the unspoken war between them. He was in agony, half mad with fever, and he was accusing her of sharing his sickness. Elena stared at him. The heat of his hand, the fire in his eyes, the smell of blood and whiskey. It all closed in on her. She felt a dizzying, terrible pull. He was right, and she hated him for it. She did not answer. She could not. She stopped pulling her hand. Instead, with her free hand, she took a rag, soaked it in whiskey, and pressed it, hard, into the open wound. He hissed, his body going rigid, his grip on her wrist tightening until she thought the bones would snap. Then, slowly, painfully, his fingers uncurled, he let her go. She threaded the needle. Her hands were perfectly steady. She stitched his side. It was a clumsy, bloody business. He did not pass out, but lay there, his jaw clenched, a low, constant groan coming from his throat. When she was done, she bandaged him tightly with the clean rags. He was pale, his breathing shallow. Jedediah arrived as she was finishing, his face grim. "He'll have a fever," he said. Night fell. The cabin was ice cold. Jedediah started a fire, but it was small. Thorn began to shake, deep, uncontrolled shivers that rattled the cot. "He's freezing," Jedediah said. "The blood loss. He needs warmth, or the fever will take him." Elena looked at the cot. It was barely wide enough for one man. She looked at Jedediah. He was already settling by the fire, his rifle across his lap. He would take the watch. She took a breath. She lay down on the cot, her back to Thorn, pressing herself against his shaking body. It was the most intimate and most revolting thing she had ever done. His shivers ran through her. She was stiff, rigid, her skin crawling. She lay there for hours, listening to him breathe, to the fire crackle. "The scars," she whispered into the darkness, the words coming out before she could stop them. "On your face." He was quiet for so long she thought he was unconscious. "Gettysburg," he murmured, his voice so low she barely heard it. "A piece of shrapnel." She waited. "And the one on your hand?" Another long, agonizing silence. "Losing," he whispered. His voice was thick, broken. "I lost someone. I loved. I hit a wall. The wall won." His words hung in the tiny, cold cabin. I lost someone I loved. He was a man made of loss, just like her. She said nothing. She did not sleep. She just lay there, her back against his, a wall of shared warmth in the dark. They made it to Santa Fe 2 days later. Thorne was weak, his side a constant, throbbing pain, but he was alive, his jaw set in stubborn silence. They did not speak of the cabin, of the night, of his confession. The city was a shock, a swirl of dust, noise, and people. They found Silas Croft's office tucked away on a side street. It was a small, dark room that smelled of old paper and stale whiskey. Croft himself was an old man, thin and watery-eyed. He looked startled to see them. "Miss Rios," he said, his hands fluttering. "And Mr. Calhoun, I was not expecting you." "The hearing," Elena said, her heart pounding. "You filed the complaint. You are my witness. You know my father owed no money." Croft's eyes darted from her, to Thorne, to the floor. "Ah, yes, the complaint. Yes, a difficult matter. You see, Miss Rios, I have since reviewed the bank's paperwork. It seems quite in order. The loan was valid, the foreclosure legal." "What?" Elena's blood ran cold. "No, that is a lie. You told my father—" "I was mistaken, my dear," Croft mumbled, shuffling papers on his desk. "An old man's memory. The debt was real. I'm afraid there is nothing I can do. I shall, of course, withdraw the complaint." Elena stared at him. She saw the new, expensive bottle of whiskey on his credenza. She saw the fear in his eyes. "He paid you," she whispered. "Calhoun, you paid him off." Thorne stepped forward, his hand landing on the desk. "I paid him nothing." "Then who?" Elena's voice was rising. Thorne's eyes scanned the desk. He saw a small stack of banknotes, half hidden by a ledger. He picked one up. He did not look at the amount. He looked at the bank. "Jameson," he said, "the name a curse." "It was a trap," Elena said, the hope in her chest collapsing into a black, aching void. "Jameson paid you to file the complaint. He paid you to bring us here. He paid you to— He paid me to stay quiet," Croft said, his voice trembling. He said he would handle it. He said he would get the claim overturned and take the land for himself after I was dead." Thorne finished, his voice deadly calm. It was over. Her one chance was a lie, a tool used by another thief. It was all gone. "You!" she said, whirling on Thorne. Despair and rage made her reckless. "You knew. You said it was a trap. You let this happen. You are giving up. You are just going to let them have it? After everything." "Elena," he said, his voice flat. "It is over. The lawyer has folded. There is no case." "You are a coward," she screamed at him, her voice cracking. "You fight and you kill, but you will not fight this. You are giving up." His face went white. The accusation, "coward," hit him harder than the bullet had. He looked at her, his eyes wild. He looked at the trembling, pathetic lawyer. He looked at the walls of the office, trapping him. With a raw-throated roar, he grabbed the solid oak visitor's chair. He lifted it high and hurled it, with all his wounded, furious strength, against the opposite wall. The chair exploded, wood and plaster shattered, raining down on the floor. Croft yelped, diving under his desk. Thorne stood in the center of the ruined room, his chest heaving, his wound pulling, his eyes blazing. "Let's go," he growled, grabbing her arm. He stalked out of the office, dragging her with him. They had rooms at the hotel, adjoining, but separate. Thorne had not spoken a word since the lawyer's office. He stood at the window of his room, his back to her, staring down at the street. The door between their rooms was open. Elena sat on the edge of her cot, the world gone gray. She was empty. She felt nothing but a vast, hollow ache. Her eyes fell on a bottle of whiskey on her dresser. left by Thorn for his wound. She grabbed it. She pulled the cork and drank, long and deep. The liquid fire burned down her throat, a welcome, sharp pain. "Stop that," Thorn said, his voice quiet, not turning from the window.
"Why?"
she snapped, her voice thick.
"It is over. You lost. I lost. The Jamesons win. My father is dead for nothing."
She took another drink, the fumes making her eyes water. She was angry at him, at Croft, at her father for dying. She felt dirty, covered in the dust of the road, the blood of the fight. She stood, her hands clumsy from the whiskey, and began tone-button her dress. She was suffocating. She needed to get it off. "What are you doing?" he asked, turning. He saw her. She had thrown her dusty dress to the floor. She stood in her chemise, torn and soiled from the journey, her dark hair tumbling from its pins, her shoulders bare. She was not a savage. She was not a debtor. She was a woman, undone, her face flushed with whiskey and despair. "I am finished," she whispered, her voice breaking. She swayed, sitting back on the cot. "I am so tired. I am just finished." He crossed the space between their rooms in 2 strides. He stood over her, a dark, looming shadow. "You are not finished," he said, his voice a low growl. "You do not know how to be." "You do not know me," she spat, looking up at him, her vision blurred by tears and alcohol. "I know you," he said, his voice rough with a new, strange emotion. "I know your pride. I know your hate. It is the same as mine."
"I am nothing like you,"
she cried, surging to her feet. She shoved him, her palms flat against his chest. It was a mistake. The second she touched him, the air crackled. He grabbed her hands, his fingers locking around her wrists, stopping the blow. He held her there. "You are exactly like me," he breathed. His face was inches from hers. She could smell the faint, metallic tang of his blood. The dust, the man.
"I hate you,"
she whispered, the tears finally breaking free, hot and furious, cutting trails through the grime on her cheeks. "I know," he said, and he kissed her. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a collision. It was brutal. It was the desperate, unspoken culmination of the fire, the fence post, the dream, the stitches. It was all his rage, all her grief, all their shared, bitter loneliness, crashing together in the dark. His mouth was hard on hers, punishing, demanding. He was not asking, he was taking. His lips were rough against her split lip. And she was not surrendering. She was fighting back. She kissed him back with all the fury she possessed, her body straining against his, her hands twisting in his grip. It was a battle, a desperate, silent argument. He backed her against the wall, his body pinning hers, his solid heat a shock against the thin cotton of her chemise. His hands left her wrists, tangling in her hair, gripping her head, holding her still for his mouth. It was desperate. It was unspoken. It was a drowning. The world outside, the land, the lawyers, the dead. It all dissolved, burned away in the raw, aching, undeniable heat. The ride back from Santa Fe was a silent, agonizing journey. The memory of the kiss in the hotel room hung between them, thick and suffocating as smoke. It had not been an act of tenderness. It had been an explosion, a desperate, brutal admission of the war they were both losing. Now, in the harsh light of day, shame and confusion settled over Elena like alkali dust. Thorn did not speak. He rode with his jaw set, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his hand occasionally touching the fresh stitches in his side. He had not been a man in that room. He had been a force, a storm of his own, and she had met him with her own tempest. Now, they were just 2 people, exhausted and bruised, with an unbridgeable, unspoken chasm between them. When they arrived at the ranch, Jedediah Stone met them at the corral. His sharp eyes took in everything. Thorn, pale and leaning in the saddle. Elena, her clothes still torn, her face etched with a new, haunted exhaustion, the way they dismounted and moved apart, as if repelled by magnets.
"Trouble in town, sir?"
Jedediah asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Jameson's men? Tate's among them, I reckon." Thorne grunted, handing his reins to the foreman. "The hearing was a bust." He looked at Elena, his face unreadable. "Back to work, Miss Rios. The debt is not paid." The words were a dismissal. He was re-establishing the line. She was the debtor. He was the master. The hotel room, the kiss, the confession in the arroyo. They had never happened. He turned and limped toward the main house, his back a rigid wall. Elena stood, trembling, as the other cowhands, drawn by the arrival, watched her. Their usual mocking leers were gone. They stared at her with a new, unwelcome curiosity. She had left with the boss, and she had come back with him. They had been gone 3 days. She turned, her pride a brittle shield, and walked to the barn. But the sanctuary was gone. It was just a cold, hay-filled shed. The whispers began within an hour. Before, she had been Calhoun's savage, a curiosity, an object of scorn. Now, she was something different, something dangerous. The ranch cook, a sour woman named Meg, gave her half portions at supper, her lips pursed in disapproval. "Some folks get a taste of the house and forget their places in the barn," she muttered, just loud enough to hear. The cowhands, who had once been loud and lewd, now fell silent when she passed. They watched her, their eyes cold. The mockery had turned. It was no longer a joke. It was an accusation. Within a week, the rumor had a name. She was not just Calhoun's woman. She was carrying his child. It was a lie, born of whispers and bad logic. They saw her pallor, the result of stress and the foul whiskey in Santa Fe. They saw her retreat into herself, her fierce silence, and mistook it for a sickness. They saw the cold, hard way Thorne Calhoun looked at her, a look of possession, not affection, and they filled in the blanks. The rumor isolated her completely. She was no longer a half-breed worker. She was a usurper, a whore who had trapped the boss. She had no allies. Jedediah Stone treated her with a gruff, pained courtesy, as if she were a problem he could not solve. The other hands were openly hostile. She confronted the rumor once. She heard 2 men by the forge. "Heard she's got a belly started," one said. "That's why he's favoring her. She trapped him good." Elena stepped out from the barn.
"That is a lie,"
she said, her voice shaking with rage.
"It is a damnable lie."
The men just looked at her, their faces smug. "Whatever you say, ma'am," one of them said, his tone making the word ma'am an insult. There was no way to fight it. To deny it was to confirm it. She was trapped. The hostility did not remain in whispers. It turned physical. She went to saddle her mare one morning, the horse that had carried her to Santa Fe. As she tightened the cinch, she felt something give. She stopped, her blood running cold. She looked closer. The latigo strap, the thick leather piece that held the saddle on the horse, had been cut, sliced, almost all the way through with a sharp knife. It had been done carefully, designed to hold for a few moments and then snap, sending her and the saddle crashing to the ground. A fall like that, on this hard land, could break a neck. She stood there, the cut strap in her hand, the world seeming to tilt. This was not a warning. This was an attempt. She did not cry. She got angry. She stormed to the main house, where Jedediah Stone was going over the accounts on the porch. Thorne was inside, in the dark study, his wound keeping him off his horse. "Mr. Stone," she said, her voice low and dangerous. She threw the severed latigo onto the table. It landed with a wet, heavy slap. "One of your men did this." Jedediah stared at the strap. His leathery face darkened. "Who?" "I do not know," she said, But it was done on this ranch, under your watch. Thorne appeared in the doorway, his face pale, his limp more pronounced. He looked at the strap, then at Elena. His eyes, those cold winter sky eyes, turned to black ice. He strode past her, ignoring Jedediah. He walked to the corral, where 3 hands were branding a new calf. One of them, a small-eyed, nervous man named Tate, saw him coming and instinctively took a step back. Thorne did not ask a question. He did not raise his voice. He walked straight up to Tate. "Get your roll," he said. Tate's face went white. "Mr. Calhoun, I don't know what you're talking about." "You endanger my stock," Thorne said, his voice deadly quiet. He did not mention Elena. He did not mention the strap. "You endanger my ranch. You have 1 hour to be off my land." "You cannot prove it was me," Tate protested, his voice high. Thorne stepped closer, his hand dropping to the butt of his pistol. "Do I need to?" Tate saw the bunkhouse, saw Pike's broken face, saw the absolute lack of mercy in his boss's eyes. He scrambled, his bluff collapsing into pure, rodent-like fear. "I am going!" He gathered his meager belongings from the bunkhouse, his hands shaking. As he walked past Elena, his fear turned to a venomous hate. "You think you are so special?" he spat, his voice low. "You are just his half-breed whore. He'll get tired of you. He'll throw you out. And when he does, I will be waiting." Thorne moved, a blur of motion despite his injury. But Jedediah was quicker. He put a hand on Thorne's chest. "He is not worth the bullet, sir. He is just wind. He is gone." Tate scrambled onto his horse and galloped away, not looking back. But his threat hung in the air, a poison that mixed with the rumors, making the ranch feel more like a prison than a sanctuary. That night, Elena heard it, a sound that did not belong to the ranch, a steady, rhythmic thud, thud, thud. A hammer. She slipped out of the barn, keeping to the shadows. The sound was coming from the edge of the Calhoun property, near the spring house, but set back, away from the main buildings, nestled in a grove of cottonwoods. She crept closer, in the moonlight. She saw him. Thorne was building. He had set 4 corner posts. Jedediah was there, helping him brace a crossbeam, but it was Thorne who swung the hammer. He was working with a grim, furious energy. He lifted a heavy log, his face contorting in pain as his wound pulled, and slammed it into place. He was building a cabin, a small, 1-room shack. Elena watched from the darkness, her hand pressed to her mouth. Her heart felt as if it were being squeezed. She knew, with a certainty that made her ache, that the cabin was for her. It was not a gift, it was a banishment. He was moving her out of the barn. He was moving her away from his men. He was putting her in a box, separate from the ranch, separate from him, after the kiss, after the confession. This was his answer. He was building a wall of wood and stone to put between them. Her pride, that stiff, reliable armor, rose up. She hated him for it. She hated this silent, high-handed gesture. He would not even speak to her. He would just build her a cage and expect her to be grateful. She stood there for a long time, watching him work, the sound of the hammer like a judgment. He was swinging it as if he were trying to kill something, the memory of the hotel, or the weakness he had shown her. She felt a terrible, traitorous ache. She hated the cabin, but she also hated the fact that he was building it himself, in the dark, while he was still wounded. She turned and fled back to the barn, her silence as stiff and unyielding as his. The walls of the cabin went up over the next few days. Thorne worked on it relentlessly, as if it were a penance. The tension on the ranch was so thick. Elena felt she could not breathe. She was trapped by the rumors, by Tate's threat, by the unspoken thing that now lay between her and Thorne. She felt like she was disappearing, becoming nothing but the whispers about her. One night, she could not stand it. She could not stand the barn, the smell of hay, the sound of the hammer, the cold eyes of the men. She needed to remember who she was. She saddled her mare, quiet as a ghost. She slipped the bridle and rode out, not fast, just a steady walk. Away from the Calhoun spread, she rode south into the low, rolling hills that bordered Jameson's land, though she did not care. She rode for an hour, the moonlight bleaching the landscape to silver and black. She rode to a place she had not been in over a year, a solitary, ancient juniper tree, its branches twisted like a grieving woman. At its base was a small, unassuming pile of stones, her mother's grave. Maria Rios, a Mexican woman from a border town, who had married an Anglo's son, a woman who, like her, had lived between two worlds and belonged to neither. She had died 10 years ago, not from a bullet, but from a sickness. Cholera had swept the valley. The town doctor, a white man, had refused to see her. He did not treat her kind. Her father had been away, selling cattle. Elena, just a girl, had held her mother's hand as she died, helpless. Elena slid from the mare and sank to her knees. The grief she had held back, for her father, for the ranch, for her own shattered pride, it all came pouring out. She wept. She wept for her mother, left to die. She wept for her father, murdered for his land. She wept for herself, a ghost, haunted by rumors, trapped by a man she despised and desired in equal, terrifying measure. She was so alone. A horse's soft wicker cut through her sobs. She scrambled to her feet, her hand flying to the rusted pistol at her waist. He was there. Thorne sat his horse 20 yards away, a dark silhouette against the moonlit ridge. He had followed her. "Leave me alone!" she cried, her voice thick, wiping her face with a furious, dirty hand. "Are you always watching me? Can I not even grieve in peace?" He dismounted, his limp pronounced in the uneven terrain. "This is Jameson's land," he said, his voice rough. "Tate is out here. It is not safe." "Safe?" she laughed, a bitter, broken sound. She gestured wildly to the pile of stones. "I am not safe anywhere. Not on your land, with your men cutting my saddle. Not here. Do you know what this is? This is my mother. They killed her. The good people in town. They let her die because she was Mexican. Because she was like me. There is no safe." Thorne stopped. He looked at the simple grave. He looked at her face streaked with tears and dirt, her whole body shaking. He understood. He, who had buried his own child in a blizzard, understood a lonely grave in a hostile land. He did not speak. He did not try to comfort her. He walked past her, his boots crunching on the gravel. And he knelt. He did not kneel to her. He knelt beside her, facing the pile of stones. A fellow mourner. They stayed like that, in the vast, cold silence of the high desert, for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice so low she almost did not hear it. It was not meant for her. It was meant for the stones. "My wife, Sarah. When the typhoid took her, it was not clean. It was ugly." Elena stopped breathing. "She was in so much pain," he continued, his voice a raw whisper. "She did not know who I was. She begged me to die. She begged me to end it, to put a pillow over her face." He stared at his own hands, the scarred, calloused hands that were resting on his knee. "I could not," he confessed, his voice breaking. "I ran. I left the room. I could not watch. I could not stay. I did not hold her hand." He looked up, his eyes finding Elena's in the dark. "The doctor found me in the barn the next morning. She had died alone. I did not know how to stay." It was a confession of his deepest shame, the cowardice he had accused her of. He saw in himself. Elena looked at this hard, brutal man, his soul stripped bare in the moonlight. He was not a monster. He was just a man, as broken and haunted as she was. He was the man from her dream, the one who stood behind her as the world burned. Without thinking, her hand lifted. It was shaking. She reached out and touched his face. Her fingers, calloused from the work he had forced on her, brushed the rough stubble of his cheek. He flinched, a sharp, violent intake of breath, as if she had struck him. His eyes closed, just for a second, his whole body rigid. No one had touched him in kindness, she realized, in a very, very long time. He did not move. He did not pull away. She drew her hand back, the shock of her own gesture making her heart pound. The space between them crackled. After a long moment, he stood up, his joints popping in the cold. He offered her a hand. She ignored it, pushing herself to her feet. The ride home was heavy, weighed down by the confessions they had left at that grave. The silence was no longer angry. It was fragile, a thin sheet of ice over a deep, dark river. They topped the last rise, the one that overlooked the Calhoun spread. The smell hit them first, acrid, sharp. "Smoke," Thorne swore, his voice a low curse. Below them, the ranch was in chaos. A pillar of black smoke and orange flame ripped into the night sky. It was not the main house. It was the large hay barn. A grass fire, fanned by the night wind, was spreading from it, a creeping line of orange that was snaking toward the bunkhouse. "Tate," Thorne snarled. He did not need proof. This was the vengeance he had promised. He kicked his horse, spurring it into a desperate, reckless gallop down the rocky slope. Elena was right behind him. When they hit the ranch yard, it was chaos. Jedediah and the 5 remaining hands were forming a desperate bucket brigade from the stock tank, their shouts lost in the roar of the flames. "The barn is lost," Thorne roared, leaping from his horse before it stopped. "Jed, get the remuda out of the small corral. Now, the rest of you, wet sacks. Stop the grass line." He looked at Elena. "The water barrel! Sacks! Move!" She did not hesitate. The shared memory of the grave, the confession, was gone, replaced by the immediate, searing heat of the fire. She ran to the barrel by the cookhouse, plunging burlap sacks into the water, her arms screaming at the weight. They worked side by side. It was not a man and a debtor. It was not a man and a woman. It was 2 people against the fire. The heat was a physical thing, a giant, invisible hand pushing them back. The smoke was a choking, blinding fog. They beat at the edge of the grass fire, swinging the heavy wet sacks, stomping on embers, their lungs burning. Thorne was a machine, a leader again. He was everywhere, shouting encouragement, beating at the highest flames, his limp forgotten. Elena worked until her arms were numb, until her throat was raw. The smoke burned her eyes, the tears streaming down her sooty face. She swung the sack, beat, stomped, plunged it back into the bucket, and swung again. The wind shifted. A sudden, vicious gust drove a wall of thick, black smoke and red embers directly toward her. She was enveloped. She could not see. She could not breathe. The air was pure, toxic heat. Her lungs seized. She tried to gasp, but there was no air, only smoke. She stumbled, her knees buckling. The world went gray at the edges. She was going to faint. She fell to her knees, coughing, a desperate, racking sound, her body useless. "Elena!" She heard her name, a raw shout through the roar. He burst through the wall of smoke, a dark shape, his eyes wild. He was not the boss. He was not the major. He was the man from the graveyard. He grabbed her, scooping her up in his arms as if she weighed nothing. He ran, coughing, stumbling, carrying her away from the fire line, toward the relative safety of the main house. He set her down by the well, her body slumping against the cold stone. She was conscious, but barely, her breathing a painful, tearing rasp. He knelt in front of her, his own chest heaving, his face black with soot. He gripped her shoulders, his hands biting into her, his arms shaking. He was terrified. She looked up at him, her vision blurry, her lungs on fire. "Elena," he coughed, his voice ragged, broken. "Don't!" She could only stare, confused. Don't leave me too, he whispered. It was not an order. It was a plea. He was not the man who had lost his ranch. He was the man who had run from his wife's bedside, the man who had buried his child in the snow. He was terrified of being left alone. In the smoke, again. She just looked at him, her throat too raw to speak, her heart cracking open. The fire had broken them. The acrid smell of burned hay and charred timber hung over the ranch for days, a constant reminder of the cost of their war. But Thorne's words, his ragged plea by the well, "Don't leave me too," had burned hotter than any flame. It had changed the air between them, stripping away the last layers of pretense. The fire also brought the law. Jedediah Stone, sifting through the ashes of the hay barn, found a tin canteen and a harness knife. It was not ranch issue. It was Tate's. That, combined with the earlier attack in the arroyo, was enough. Jedediah rode to Santa Fe, not to a lawyer, but to the territorial marshal. It was no longer a land dispute. It was attempted murder. The hearing was reconvened, this time with an armed marshal at the door. The atmosphere was not one of civil bureaucracy, but of criminal judgment. The commission, their faces grim, were no longer interested in banknotes. They were interested in the campaign of violence waged by the Jameson Ranch. Elena sat at the witness table. She was clean, her hair pulled back, her hands, though scarred, folded calmly in her lap. She wore her mother's one good dress, a faded blue cotton. She felt hollow, empty but calm. She testified. She spoke of her father, of the threats, of the cowhand who had warned her, of the fire that burned her home. She spoke of the arroyo, the ambush, the fire that had almost killed her. She did not raise her voice. She did not weep. She just laid the facts bare, like stones in the sun. She never once looked at Thorne, but she felt him, sitting on the bench directly behind her, a solid, silent weight. Thorne sat, his hands on his knees. He said nothing. He was a spectator at the unraveling of his own life. The lead commissioner, a stern man named Howard, listened to it all. He read the marshal's report on the fire and the arroyo attack. He looked at the bank foreclosure documents, and he looked at Elena. Mr. Calhoun, Howard said, his voice flat. The court recognizes that your purchase of this banknote was, on its surface, legal. However, this commission has been presented with overwhelming evidence of a criminal conspiracy surrounding this land. A conspiracy that resulted in the death of Mateo Rios and repeated violent attempts on the life of Miss Rios. And, it seems, yourself. He cleared his throat. It is the opinion of this commission that the original debt was manufactured by the Jameson Ranch, through intimidation and violence, to force a sale. The subsequent foreclosure is therefore tainted. The Jameson Ranch sought to drive both you and Miss Rios from this territory. They failed. He picked up his gavel. This commission rules against your claim. The foreclosure is nullified. The land, property, and title are hereby restored, effective immediately, to the sole surviving heir, Miss Elena Rios. The gavel struck. It was done. Elena sat frozen, the words not making sense. She had won. She had won. Before the room could move, before she could even turn, Thorne stood up. His chair scraped loudly on the wooden floor. Mr. Howard. Thorne's voice boomed, cutting through the silence. He did not sound like a man who had just lost everything. He sounded relieved. He reached into his coat and pulled out the folded, official deed. The commission is right, he said. He walked past the table, ignoring the stunned commissioners, and stopped directly in front of Elena. She had to look up at him. His face was unreadable, his eyes shadowed. This was never about the law, he said, his voice quiet. For her alone, he held out the deed. She stared at it, her hand not moving. Take it, he said, pushing it gently toward her. She finally, numbly, took the paper. It was heavy. It was her life. He looked at her, his gaze holding hers, and a small, bitter smile touched his lips. You've got more fight than any man I've ever known. Take it. I ain't the owner anymore.
Thorn,
she whispered, her voice choking. She was stunned, lost. She wanted to say thank you. She wanted to say she was sorry. She wanted to say she did not know what. But he had already turned. He did not look back. He walked, his limp more pronounced on the clean floor, straight out of the courtroom. He did not say another word. He just walked away, leaving her alone in the sudden, echoing silence, holding her father's wrench in her trembling hand. Days passed. Elena returned to the land, but it was not a victory. It was a haunting. She moved out of the barn and into the small, ruined adobe house of her father's. She could not bring herself to touch the new cabin Thorn had built. It stood by the cottonwoods, solid, finished, and empty. A monument to what? His guilt? His anger? The Calhoun ranch was silent. The herds were gone. The sounds of the bunkhouse, the laughter, the curses, the harmonica at night were gone. She saw no riders. She smelled no cook fire smoke. The silence was worse than the fighting. It was a raw, open wound. He had given her back the land, but he had taken the life from it. He had taken himself. After 3 days of this suffocating quiet, she could not bear it. She saddled her mare and rode, not to her father's grave, not to her mother's, but to his. The main house was empty. The door was unlocked. The porch chair where he carved was gone. The bunkhouse was swept clean. The corral was empty, the gates swinging loose in the wind. She found Jedediah Stone in the main barn, coiling a long lariat. He was the only one left.
Jed,
she said, her voice small in the cavernous space. He stopped his work and turned, slowly. He took off his hat, his face a map of tired lines. Miss Rios. He called her Miss Rios. Not savage, not girl.
Where is he?
She asked, though she already knew. Gone, Jedediah said, his voice rough. Sold the herd yesterday. A trail boss from Texas took the last of 'em this morning. He paid me and the boys our full wages, plus extra. Gone where? Jedediah shook his head. He looked at the empty stalls. North, Oregon, maybe. He ain't built for this place. Ma'am, not anymore. He looked at her, his eyes kind, but blunt. He said he was tired of the blood, said he was just done. She found him in the small barn, the one he had first seen her in. He was sweeping the dust and straw from a ranch that was no longer his. He was just finishing. She stood in the doorway, a shadow against the bright, empty day. He stopped, his back to her. You are running away. She said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement, hollow and aching. He did not turn.
I'm leaving. There is nothing left to do. You gave it all up,
she whispered, taking a step into the barn. The smell of old hay and leather was overwhelming.
The ranch, the herd, years of your life. You gave it all up for me.
He finally turned. He looked exhausted. The fire was gone from his eyes. He just looked empty. I am tired, Elena, tired of the blood, tired of Jameson, tired of the fight. He looked around the barn, at the empty space.
Jed is right. There is nothing here for me.
Nothing. The word was so quiet. He almost did not hear it. She was standing 10 feet from him, but the distance felt like a canyon.
You are a liar,
she said, her voice shaking. He frowned, his exhaustion hardening.
Do not start. You are a liar,
she said again, louder, taking another step.
And
her voice broke.
I am a coward.
He stared at her, confused. This was not the fight he expected.
All this time,
she said, the words tumbling out, the dam of her pride finally shattering into 1,000 pieces.
My pride. It was all I had. But it was not pride. It was fear. I was afraid to need anyone. Afraid to be weak. I thought if I was hard enough, no one could hurt me again, not like they hurt my mother, not like they hurt my father. She was crying, the tears she had refused to shed at her father's grave, in the fire, in the courtroom. They came now, hot and silent. She walked the last few steps, until she was standing directly in front of him. She looked up into his stunned, haunted face. "I am so tired of being strong. Thorn," she whispered. She raised her trembling hands and placed them on his chest. She choked on the word. "I think I loved you the moment you bled for me in that arroyo, when you were hurt, when you were not a monster, when you were just a man." He stood frozen, as if she had struck him. He looked down at her, at the tears on her face, at her hands on his chest. He saw her, not the savage, not the debtor, not the enemy. He saw the woman who had touched his cheek at her mother's grave. He had run from his dying wife. He had buried his child in the snow. He had turned his heart to stone, and she had just cracked it open with her bare hands. His own hands came up, his arms circling her. He did not grab, he held. He lifted her, his feet shuffling in the straw, pulling her tight against him until her feet left the floor. His head bent down, and he kissed her. It was not the bruising, angry collision from the hotel. It was slow. It was a question. It was a confession. It was the desperate, starving kiss of a man who had not known kindness in a decade. It was the kiss of a man who was, finally, staying. She clung to him, her tears wetting his shirt, her mouth answering his, not with a fight, but with a surrender that felt, for the first time, like a victory. He did not let her go. He carried her out of the barn, across the empty yard. He did not go to her father's house. He walked straight to the small, solid cabin he had built, the one nestled in the cottonwoods. He kicked the new, unstained door open. It smelled of fresh-cut pine and clean, empty air. His bedroll, the only thing he had not packed, was lying on the floor. He set her down, but he did not release her. He held her face, his thumbs gently wiping the tears from her cheeks, his rough hands. The hands that had beaten a man and built a wall were impossibly gentle. He began to unbutton her dress, his fingers clumsy, not with rage, but with a reverence that made her ache. She met his touch, her own hands rising, not to stop him, but to trace the line of his scar, the one from Gettysburg. They sank to their knees, onto the bedroll. The world outside, the burned ranch, the dead men, the empty land, it all fell away. There was only the smell of pine, the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light, and the overwhelming, terrifying, profound relief of being, finally, known. He laid her back. His rough hands, now gentle, learned the shape of her. Her pride was gone. His rage was gone. All that was left was two broken, wounded people, finding a way to be whole. She held him, his weight a comfort, his skin against hers a promise. As the last of her defenses fell, she clung to him, her voice a raw whisper against his ear, her first and only true command. "Don't leave me," she breathed. "This is ours now." The cabin was still, filled with the pale, gray light of dawn. Elena woke first. She was on the floor, on Thorne's bedroll, his arm a heavy, warm weight across her waist, his body a solid wall against her back. The air smelled of pine, dust, and him. For a long, terrified moment, she could not move. The shame, hot and sharp, rose in her throat. Her pride, the armor she had worn her entire life, was gone. And she felt naked, exposed, and horribly weak. She had not just surrendered. She had broken. She had begged him to stay. She tried to slip away, to slide from under his arm. His grip tightened. He did not wake, not fully, but his body registered her leaving. He pulled her back, his nose bumping against her hair, and his breath hitched,
a low groan of a man still half asleep. She froze. This was not the grip of a master on a debtor. It was the unconscious, possessive hold of a man who had not held another human being in his sleep in years. He was not chaining her, he was clinging to her. She relaxed, just a fraction, and let her head rest back against his shoulder. The fear began to recede, replaced by a strange, fragile, and utterly terrifying calm. She was not his prisoner. She was his partner. She had not broken. She had chosen. This, she realized, was what her father had meant. The man who saw past her pride had not destroyed it. He had simply made it unnecessary. When he woke, the sun was high. He was instantly alert, the soldier in him snapping his eyes open. He saw her, awake, watching him, and he tensed. The memory of the night, of her words, of his own desperate need, rushing back. He looked, for a second, like a man trapped. "You are staying," she said. It was not a question. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of regret, of mockery. He found none. He saw only a quiet, weary resolve. "The ranch is yours," he said, his voice rough. "I have no claim." "This cabin is yours," she countered, soft but firm. "You built it. The land is mine. The herd is gone." She took a breath. "I know how to grow corn. I know how to mend a fence. I do not know how to run a ranch. I do not know how to fight men like Jameson. Not alone." She sat up, pulling the blanket around her. "You are tired of blood. So am I. I am not asking you to fight for me, Thorn. I am asking you to build with me." He saw the offer. It was not a plea. It was a contract, offered not in a lawyer's office, but on a bedroll. A partnership. He sat up, the scars on his chest and side stark in the morning light. "I sold the herd," he said. "I have the money. It is enough to buy a new starter herd, a small one. We can rebuild." "We can," she agreed. The work was different this time. It was not the grinding, humiliating labor of a debtor. It was the back-breaking, hopeful labor of owners. Elena found her father's small, hidden tin of seeds, the ones he had saved from his best crops. She took Thorn to the field she had burned, the black, ashen rectangle that had been her monument to pride. "Here," she said. He did not condemn her. He did not remind her of her folly. He just hitched the plow to his remaining draft horses and tilled the ash into the soil, turning the symbol of her despair into a bed of new life. She walked behind him, planting the corn, the beans, the squash, her father's seeds, in her father's land, turned by the man she loved. Thorn, in turn, took her with him to the cattle auction in Santa Fe. He did not buy the prime, heavy steers. He bought lean, tough longhorns, cows, and a single bull, animals as scarred and stubborn as they were. "They are not for money," he taught her, his voice no longer an order, but a lesson. "Not yet. They are for survival. You do not look at the meat. You look at the legs. You look at the eyes. You look for the one that knows how to find water where there is none." He taught her how to manage the new, small herd, his hands over hers as she learned to tie a new knot, his body pressed against hers as he showed her how to balance her weight in the saddle for a fast cut. They argued. He was a brute, and she was stubborn. He wanted to build the fences high. She wanted to let the cattle roam. They fought over branding irons and water rights, but they were the arguments of partners, not enemies. The land was still brutal. A coyote took a calf. A late frost killed the first blossoms on her beans. But for the first time in her life, the land felt alive. It was not a prison to be endured, but a challenge to be met. The town, however, had not forgotten. When they rode to the mercantile for supplies, the whispers followed them. The townsfolk had seen the court ruling. They knew the land was hers, but they also saw her, the half-breed, riding beside the scarred, formidable Thorn Calhoun. They saw him buy her a new, sturdy dress and new boots, paying from his own wallet. The rumors simply changed their flavor. She was not his prisoner. She was his whore, a savvy one, who had managed to get her name on the deed. The women in town pulled their skirts aside when she passed, their faces tight with moral disapproval. The men, who had once feared her, now looked at her with a leering, unpleasant familiarity. Elena's back went rigid. She felt the old, hot pride rise. She wanted to spit in the dust. Thorn saw it. He, who had never given a damn for the opinions of sheep, felt a low, burning rage. He did not care what they thought of him, but he cared what they thought of her. He finished his purchase, grabbed the heavy sacks of flour and salt, and walked out. In the middle of the street, in front of the saloon and the church, he stopped. He turned to her, and deliberately, in front of everyone, he touched her face. He brushed a stray piece of hair from her cheek, his thumb lingering. It was a small, public act of possession and of tenderness. It was a claim. The whispers faltered. The real test came a week later. A new settler, a man named Davies with 2 grown, loutish sons, had bought a piece of land downstream. He rode onto Elena's ranch, his sons behind him, and began tearing down the new fence near her spring. Elena rode out alone. "You are trespassing, Mr. Davies." Davies, a big man with a florid face, laughed. "This is a free-range territory. Girly, and this spring feeds the main creek. I'm just ensuring my water rights." He looked her up and down. "You should not be out here alone. Why do you not run and get Mr. Calhoun?" "You do not need Mr. Calhoun," Elena said, her voice ice. "You are speaking to the owner. This is my spring. This is my land. The court has affirmed it. Get off, or I will have the marshal remove you." "The court?" Davies spat. "The court does not know this land, and it does not know what we do with your kind who get above their station. I think." He never finished. Thorn rode up, not fast, not with his gun drawn. He just appeared, his horse cresting the small rise, Jedediah Stone right behind him. Jedediah had stayed on, his loyalty not to the ranch, but to the man. Thorn sat his horse, his hands resting on his saddle horn. He just looked. Davies's face paled. He knew Calhoun's reputation. He had heard the stories of Pike and Tate and the Jameson crew. "Calhoun," Davies stammered. I was just explaining the water rights to the lady." "Mr. Davies," Thorn said, his voice flat, carrying in the still air. "You are on Miss Rios's land. You are destroying her property, and you are threatening her." "I was not. I was just—" "You have 30 seconds, Thorn said, "to get your sons and your tools off her land. The commission sided with her. The marshal sides with her. And I side with her. If you ever set foot on this property again, I will not send for the marshal." It was a promise. Davies and his sons scrambled. They gathered their tools, mounted their horses, and fled. 2 other ranchers, mending a line in the distance, had seen the whole thing. The story was all over town by nightfall. He had not defended his own land. He had, in public, defended hers. He had called her his partner. The whispers did not stop. But they were no longer about her. They were about him, the man who had given up a ranch for a half-Mexican girl. They did not understand it, but they feared it. The brutal winter came, as it always did. But this one was worse. It came early and stayed late, a suffocating blanket of white that seemed determined to bury the world. They were trapped. The small cabin Thorn had built became their entire universe. The wind howled, a constant, shrieking moan against the new, solid walls. They huddled inside, the cabin a tiny, warm island in a sea of frozen, white death. The intimacy was absolute. They slept in the same bedroll. They ate from the same pot. They moved around each other in the small, 10 by 12 space. A silent, practiced dance. The silence, which had once been a wall between them, was now a comfort. One night, the blizzard reached its peak. The snow was so deep, the wind so loud. It felt like the end of the world. A new calf, born too early, was dying in the lean-to. "It will freeze," Elena said. "It is already half gone," Thorn said, staring into the fire. Elena just pulled on her boots and his heavy coat. She went out into the white, screaming maelstrom. He swore, grabbed his own, and followed her. They fought the wind, hip-deep in snow, to the lean-to. They found the calf, a small, shivering, ice-caked thing. Together, they lifted it. They carried it, a shared, stumbling burden, back to the cabin. They laid it on a pile of sacks by the hearth, rubbing it down, forcing warm, watered-down milk into its mouth. They worked for an hour, their clothes soaked, their hair frozen. Finally, the calf gave a low, weak bleat and tried to lift its head. It was alive. Elena sat back on her heels, exhausted, her face streaked with soot and snow. She looked at Thorn. His beard was a solid mass of ice. His scar was a vivid white against his frozen, red skin. He looked absurd, a mountain of a man, brought low by a 3-day-old calf. A small sound escaped her, a laugh. It was a rusty, shocked sound. Thorn looked at her, then at the calf, then back at her. His face, so used to a scowl, cracked. A low, rumbling sound came from his chest. It was the first time she had ever heard him laugh. It was the sound of a rusty hinge, of a man who had forgotten how. They laughed by the firelight, in the cabin he had built, with a half-dead calf at their feet. While the world tried to kill them, they had survived. In the spring, when the snows finally melted, Elena went to the ruined adobe of her father's house. It was time to salvage what was left, to use the good bricks to build a proper foundation for a new barn. She was prying up the warped, rotted floorboards in what had been his room when she found it, a small, tin box wedged between the joists. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was her mother's silver locket and a single, folded letter. It was her father's hand, his elegant, careful script. It was dated the day after the first fire, the one that had destroyed his house. "My dearest Elena," it began. "If you are reading this, the worst has come. The Jamesons will not stop. Do not let them break you. Your pride is your mother's, and it is your strength. It is the best of you. But do not let it be your prison. I pray you find someone who won't try to break your pride, just someone who sees past it." Elena sank back on her heels, the letter trembling in her hand. Someone who sees past it? She looked out the ruined window, toward the field. Thorn was there. He was plowing. He was turning the black ashen earth of the field she had burned, preparing it for her seeds. He was, literally, rebuilding the future she had tried to destroy in her pride. She did not wait. She saddled her mare, the letter clutched in her hand. She rode out to him, her heart a wild, painful beating in her chest. He stopped the horses when he saw her, wiping the sweat from his brow with a forearm. He was covered in dirt. He looked solid, real, permanent. She did not dismount. She rode up beside him and held out the letter. "What is this?" he asked, his voice rough. "Read it." He took it, his hands clumsy with dirt. He unfolded it and read. His face did not change, but she saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. He read it twice. He folded it, slowly, and handed it back to her. "He'd have liked you," Elena said, her voice soft. Thorn looked at her, her face so open, so full of a love that still terrified him. He looked at the plowed field, at the new barn, at the grave on the hill. He looked at the life they were building from ash. He did not reply. He dropped the reins, strode to her horse and reached up. His hands spanned her waist, and he pulled her, strong and sure, down from the saddle. He did not kiss her. He just pulled her against his chest, burying his face in her hair. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her cheek pressed against his sweat-soaked shirt. She held on to him, the smell of turned earth, of honest labor, of him, filling her senses. It was an embrace of pure, grounded, hard-won belonging. Dirt, sweat, sky. That night, the summer stars were a brilliant, cold fire in the black sky. A small cook fire snapped and hissed outside the cabin. Thorne sat on the small porch, his knife and a block of pine in his hands. He was carving, not a bird. He was carving a horse, small and proud, its head thrown back. Elena came out of the cabin, her hair loose. She walked over to him. She gently took the knife from his hand, closed it, and took the block of wood. "No more work," she said, her voice a low tease. She set them on the porch. She held out her hand. "Come on." "What for?" "Just come on." She pulled him up, his joints protesting. She led him away from the fire, to the flat, packed earth at the edge of the half-built barn. There was no music, only the high, thin song of the crickets and the whisper of the night wind in the cottonwoods. She turned, putting her arms around his neck. "Dance with me." "I do not know how," he growled, his body stiff. "I do not either," she whispered, "so we will learn." He put his hands on her waist, and they stood there, under the vast, uncaring wheel of the stars. Then, slowly, they began to move, a clumsy, shuffling circle in the dust. He was a big, scarred, brutal man. She was a proud, half-broken, defiant woman. They were two survivors, bruised and healed, still arguing, still learning, still, finally, loving. She leaned her head against his chest, the rough wool of his shirt scratching her cheek. She could hear the steady, strong beat of his heart. She smiled, a slow, secret smile. She tilted her head back, looking up at him in the starlight, her eyes full of a mischief he was just beginning to understand. "Is that all you've got?" she whispered. He looked down at her, his calloused thumb tracing the line of her jaw. A slow smile, the one that was hers and hers alone, touched his scarred lips. He bent, his mouth brushing her ear, his voice a low, rough promise. "Not even close." Thank you for listening to this story. We would love for you to comment with where you are listening from to connect with other fans. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts.